Last night, no one lost the debate and no one won the debate. So neither Trump nor Mrs. Clinton beat the other one and attracted new voters last night, but I don't think either one of them lost potential independents either.
So who with that in mind, who won?
Yeah, I don't think either one won. In Trump's case, if his attempt was to be more presidential and stick to talking points, in some areas he did that very well. There were multiple times during the debate where he gave very specific numbers, like the numbers of deaths in Chicago. He'd been preparing. Mrs. Clinton, I think, was trying to appear vibrant, to appear energetic, not to appear old. And she came out looking very, very healthy and very, very warm right from the beginning. So I think she overcame that problem.
What were some of the points that really stood out to you?
Well,
you think Trump did well on? He did not do well on. Then I'll ask you about Clinton.
Yeah, I think in Trump's case, where he did well was hammering Mrs. Clinton on national security and especially on NAFTA and the economy. And for anyone who wants to see change in Washington, Trump scored points by continually saying, you've been there for 30 years. You and your family have been there for 30 years. So those are areas where he was strong. He did let some opportunities go by, perhaps the biggest one being on Benghazi.
Tell me about that.
Well, he reminded her about the email scandals and those kinds of things, but when it comes to national security and keeping Americans safe, he said very little about immigration, and he totally neglected Benghazi, this scandal where, while she was Secretary of State, that essentially Americans were allowed to be massacred by violent Islamists in Libya. And it happened while she was Secretary of State. So consistently people have blamed her and blamed the administration for not intervening to protect those people.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think he dropped the ball on that? Was it because he did not prepare properly, or wasn't disciplined enough in his head? Or?
Well, so much of last night was not about national security issues. And so the questions didn't lend themselves. So many of the questions kept coming back to domestic issues or personal issues. So the moderator was asking about their individual taxes and things like that. And there wasn't a big space to talk about Syria, Iraq, Libya, and things. Now, Mr. Trump, he should have inserted it. He should have pushed on that, but he didn't.
You've been there, Secretary of State. How about Benghazi?
Exactly.
And Jeff was bringing up the point that I had just mentioned to you about where she was talking about stamina. This came under the stamina. I have the stamina. You know, I've had to testify.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have been a wonderful moment for him to, in a flip way, say, tell us, Ms. Clinton, what were you testifying for all those hours for?
That's right. You know, when they brought up the stamina thing last night at the debate, it seemed like he was caught a little bit off guard because he was clearly trying not to engage in the kind of ad hominem attacks like he has in the past. I think it would have turned off people. So he got to that point and he was trying to be judicious about his words. You're right, he should have, that was a point where he should have just pushed the Benghazi button.
Yeah, and tell us about the testifying. What did you have to testify again? Well, yeah, that was, about that. What about not paying federal taxes? Did he come off like losing middle-class people with that? About, you know, you haven't paid any federal taxes. Well, that's because I'm a winner or something like that along those lines.
I think that where he actually stumbled on the tax question was when he said, hey, if she'll release those 30,000 emails, then I'll release my taxes. And she caught him on this one. In other words, it's what he's been saying thus far is, I'll release my taxes after this audit. Then he made it sound like, no, I could press the button right now and release my tax forms. Now, I don't blame him for not wanting people going through all of his records and things of that nature, but last night it seemed like it was clearly a dodge.
Now, what about her? Where did she do well and where did she do poorly?
I think she started off strong by looking healthy after all the questions about pneumonia and the wider questions about her health and stamina over the past couple of weeks. She came out very, very warm and things. There were times for people who think that the president should be an experienced policy wonk. That's the kind of person that they want. She seems to have a great command of facts, figures, details, and those kinds of things.
Now, what about, you think that, how did he do with, if you are tired of Washington insiders, he's still your guy. So he did not lose any ground there. He solidified that because he still was able to get that point out there.
Not only was he able to say multiple times, you have been there for 30 years, your family's been there, you've been in the Senate, you're in many, many ways an adult of privilege. And she kept pushing back on that. My father was a small business owner, etc. But Trump also kept hitting her on this thing about, you're really a part of the elite, and I'm here to change things up. I'm here to change business as usual. And there's a lot of Americans who maybe they actually don't really like Donald Trump all that much. Maybe they don't know what he stands for. They don't necessarily appreciate his values, but they really would like to see dramatic change in Washington. So they're willing to vote for him as a representative of that.
It's such a wonderful issue for him because he doesn't really need to, it's so obvious that he is the outsider.
That's right. And we haven't had an outsider really in this type of role since probably Ronald Reagan. People would say, oh, Barack Obama was an outsider, but in many, many ways, as someone who went to elite schools and things, he had been part of kind of a smaller intelligentsia, part of the liberal establishment. And certainly both of the Bushes are seen as establishment people, whether or not that's fair. And so it's been quite a while since we've had a candidate running as a Republican who can say, yes, I'm an outsider.
How about with NAFTA and the economy? He did well on that.
He did. He had a command of the facts, and he was able to point to specific states, not just in the Rust Belt, but former textile states, for instance, in the South and in New England, and say, these are places where NAFTA's been a set of losers.
Yeah, you're talking about all the plants that have closed, the manufacturing plants. Yeah. He mentioned Ford, Carrier, huh?
That's right. He was able to talk about specific things, and he was naming states where it's unclear which way they're going to go. I mean, these are bellwether states, or they're purple states, whether it's New Hampshire or it's a state like Ohio. These states could be swing states in this election. It could make because it could be very, very close in the Electoral College. Remember, in 2000, what really happened is that West Virginia, 4 electoral votes went to George W. Bush. That's what really won the election in 2000. And so the small states and the swing states, they're going to really matter in November.
Anything else you'd like to add? I'm just going.
No, it's okay.
The taxes about why won't you release your taxes? Well, they're being audited. You can release them during an audit and everything. About what they're trying to hide. Does he lose anything on that?
Well, I think that
Like the foundation,
right?
Getting money from the foundation, people contributing to your foundation because they owe you money,
right?
And the way they pay you back is to go to the foundation. Yeah. Maybe they're taking a tax deduction on that.
Yeah. What Trump should have.
He's not claiming it as income.
That's right. What Trump should have done last night was keep pushing about the Clinton Foundation and kind of the politics of corruption that have attended the Clintons as a family, but especially this pay for play while she was Secretary of State with the Clinton Foundation. That's what he should have done. He didn't do that. Instead, he was back on his heels just a little bit as he was pressed over and over about income taxes. Where he's strongest is to say, hey, I make a lot of money, but there's a lot of loopholes, and I play the game as it is. And he did say that one time last night. Being honest about that this is the way the rules are structured, that's what's going to be in his best interest. He shouldn't try to dodge or to hide. He should say, this is the way it is. That's the way it's structured. By the way, I'm running as a candidate for change.
2 more questions real quick. Number one, if you were advising either one, based on what you saw this time, what would your advice be to either candidate, to Clinton and to him?
My advice to my advice to Trump would be, don't worry so much about her. Look at the audience. Talk to the audience. Because his orbit was multiple times kind of looking at her, talking to her. Where he seemed a little bit more presidential was to say, there's areas actually where we agree that this is important for the way forward for the country. He's trying to reach out to those independent voters. But my advice to him would be, speak compellingly to the American people, and not just about what the problems are, but about a vision. In her case, my advice to her would be, you have a real problem with seeming like a smug know-it-all. And it's hard not to have this sense that you're very patronizing to the American people. That actually you may want what's best for Americans, but they actually have no clue who they are. And so the authenticity factor for her is always a challenge in the way that she talks.
But how did she do last night? Better?
I think that she started off better, but she did seem rather demeaning. I'll give you an example. He called her by her title as a mark of respect, and I think he was probably told to do that by his handlers. And she called him Donald in a sneering fashion over and over and over during the night. Now, that plays to her base, who want her to hammer. But that middle independent voter who maybe thinks that she's smart, maybe thinks she's accomplished, but doesn't like her. I mean, she doesn't have the stick factor that her husband has in the past. That she's not going to win them over.
Last one. Grade each's performance.
Well, I think for her it was an A, and I don't think that her team could have expected anything better. I think that she came out smart and warm and did well for the entirety of the performance. And it is a performance. Now, Trump is an entertainer. That's why I use the word performance. I've taken him a little bit, not less seriously, but I realize that part of what he does is he understands Hollywood, he understands the camera. And with that in mind, kind of the sour look on his face when the camera was on him but he wasn't speaking, times where he struggled just a little bit with his facts and figures and then recalled them quite well. But I would say for him it's a B+ performance last night, and that he could be a little stronger next time.